All right, so next we're going to move on to our prepared speeches. We have two tonight, myself being the first one and John Orange being the second. My speech was, as I mentioned, it was somewhat of a last minute. I didn't know if there was going to be anything prepared type of speech. So I guess we can call this kind of a pocket speech. I did hack up a couple notes here. I'm going to try John's trick, see if it actually works by putting my notes up close to my camera. The title of my speech is, "What in the world are you so anxious about?" I don't have an official duration for my speech because this doesn't really fit into a Pathways project. It's just kind of an off-the-cuff speech. I'll say 5 to 7 minutes, Kelly.
Okay.
And I can see your little thumbnail, so I see green construction paper right now. That's perfect. Yellow. Red. All right, perfect. I gotcha. All right, so as I said, what in the world are you so anxious about? So anxiety, for those that don't know, defined, is a feeling or worry, nervousness or unease, which is typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. One of the biggest triggers of anxiety is fear, which is an emotional reaction to a known, well-defined external threat or danger. So there's different types of anxiety. There's normal anxiety and there's abnormal anxiety. And you'll understand why I'm even sharing this with you in a few minutes. So normal anxiety can actually be beneficial. It can be healthy. When you think of things like preparing for a sporting event, training, getting ready to be competitive, or you're going to be, studying to take a test, that type of anxiety can actually be beneficial because it pushes you to be a better performer. It'll help you in the end perform better, making sure you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. So that would be kind of an example of normal anxiety, which, as I said, is beneficial. However, abnormal anxiety, which is also called pathological, can often be very severe for people who suffer from this. It can be persistent, lasting a long time. A lot of times it can be irrational, and in some cases it can actually handicap people. So I looked into anxiety, and anxiety is broken up into two different types of symptoms. You have physical symptoms and you have psychological symptoms. So physical symptoms are made up of two different types of subset of symptoms. You have autonomic arousal and somatic symptoms. So I didn't know this, but the autonomic nervous system is a control system that acts mostly unconsciously to regulate different bodily functions like your heart rate, digestion, your respiratory rate, your pupil responses. Like when the doctor checks your eyes, they look to see that your pupils shrink. Well, that's an autonomic nervous response. You're not actually controlling your pupil. Urination and, yes, sexual arousal. It is the primary system that controls the fight or flight response in our bodies. So some examples of autonomic responses related to anxiety would be, for example, heart palpitations, chest pain or discomfort, shortness of breath, dry mouth or that cotton mouth sensation, difficulty swallowing, feeling dizzy or unsteady. Then you have somatic nervous system responses, which provides voluntary control of body movements using the muscles in your body. So for example, muscle tension, fatigue, muscle aches, headaches. And I didn't realize this, but even feeling numbness or tingling is actually an example of a somatic symptom. It's also referred to as paresthesia. Sometimes I like to use big words. Often Carolyn finds elation in the fact that I use big words. Finally, as I said, there were two types of symptoms. The second type was psychological symptoms, which are related to behaviors of your mind. So for example, fearful anticipation. There's a sense of impending danger of something that's gonna be the end of the world for you. Irritability is another example of a psychological symptom. Worrying thoughts and insomnia would be other examples as well, including restlessness. In my case, I was suffering a wide variety of these symptoms. But one of the primary events that occurred for me as a result of having these symptoms was a panic attack. And I've had several panic attacks in my adult life, and I have not officially had it diagnosed or treated as anything in particular. And I'm hearing an echo, so if we can just pause the time for a second. Sorry about that. So my physical symptoms were accelerated heart rate, chest pain, shortness of breath. I felt like I couldn't swallow, which then makes you feel like you can't breathe or you're gonna suffocate. I felt very dizzy. I felt numbness in my face. It actually traveled down into my neck and also into my arm. My psychological symptoms were fears about COVID, fears of ending up on a ventilator in the ICU because I felt like I couldn't breathe or swallow. Fear about my family not having their primary provider or caregiver around anymore because I was on my stomach in the hospital on a ventilator. And just feeling like I was losing complete control over my body and myself. Now, one of the things that probably triggered this for me was that we recently found out that Ethan's brain tumor that he had operated on last March has actually increased in size since August of 2019. So those that may remember that story, he had a brain tumor that was about the size of a plum. The doctor took out what was supposedly about 90 to 95% of the tumor, but there was some residual tissue left. Well, that residual tissue has grown by a significant amount compared, for what the doctor would like to see between August and now. And so we had a consult with him last week that for weeks, I think what was happening was anxiety was just building up in me and in my brain. And so I started all of a sudden having this very persistent headache. I started feeling this numbness in my face, down into my neck, into my shoulder, into my arm. I was feeling dizzy. I felt like I couldn't swallow. I felt like the world was coming to an end. This eventually led me to have to go in and get a CAT scan of my brain because my doctor's like, dude, I have no idea what's wrong with you. And so I went and got a CAT scan of my brain, and magically they discovered that I have a brain. And not only do I have a brain, but it was normal. So that was a total shock to me. But the bottom line is in some people, anxiety is something that, yeah, you can control these things by, mindfulness, meditation. You take your pick of what you want to do for self-help. But in some people, there is actually an issue of a chemical imbalance that's occurring. And so I worked with my doctor, and I actually started taking a medication to try to help me with my anxiety. And it is an SSRI drug, which is a popular type of medication used for treating anxiety. And what I can tell you is since I started taking the medication, I have had none of the symptoms that I was having literally multiple times a day, every day for over a week. And so the point of this speech is to let you know that if you feel these types of symptoms and you feel like you don't have control over them, you may not physically have control over them, but with the help of a doctor, with the help of kind of some meditation or mindfulness or prayer type practices, you can actually have control over it. Thank you very much.